So this is going to be a little informal. I'm not used to public speaking or anything like that. I'm coming from a lived experience perspective, so bear with me a little bit. Just first of all, thank you for everybody for being here and for the opportunity to speak about lived experience of the basic income pilot and mental illness. I guess I'll just kind of go into the story and go from there. In 2003 to 2006, I was at the tail end of my university career. I was studying psychology and anthropology and a few things at U of T. I went into a bad depression and that ended up in a psychosis. I ended up on something called ODSP. So if you live in Ontario, that's Ontario Disability Support Program. That's a benefit program for people with mental health and other physical disabilities. And ODSP gave me a little bit of money. It was enough to help support me, but it wasn't really enough to live. There's a lot of problems with ODSP. It's kind of notorious. The allotment is well below the poverty line and everything else. By about 2014, I was well enough to volunteer and start working. So you can work when you're on ODSP, but there are some definite limitations because they have clawbacks. If you earn more than what you can, if you earn more than your benefits, then basically they claw back, and so you're back in the same way you were because they put an artificial cap on your income. And so when the basic income pilot was introduced in Ontario in 2017, that was a real lifesaver because it allowed me to apply for that. There were still clawbacks, but the income ceiling was much higher. The compare, I believe around the time ODSP was between $900 and $1,000 a month, which was not really enough to live on independently. And in the basic income pilot, for somebody with a disability, it was about $1,200 a month, I believe, was the kind of the maximum amount. And just that $200 difference was actually huge, as well as the fact that the clawbacks weren't so severe, and there was more understanding and more support for people working. And so within that short time of being on that pilot, I was able to start I got a driver's license, which if you've lived in Lindsay, if you're going to work, if you're going to get back into the workforce, if you're going to do anything independently, you need a car. And Lindsay's a small rural town, so having a driver's license was a massive thing. Massively changed my life. And so I did that. Of course, Doug Ford got elected and canceled the pilot program. So I had a few months toward the end where I realized that if I retrained and got some new skills, I could try going back into the workforce. I was well enough at that time to be able to do that. So I did that. The pilot ended. So I retrained for film and television to be a lighting and electric technician, which would involve commuting to Toronto and everything, still living in Lindsay. And it was a few months before I was able to get my first film call, but I did, and then I had a gainful income. I spent the 4 years that I worked in film, I had to spend recovering from that 6 months or so of shortfall between the end of the pilot and the beginning of my work, and so that was a little bit difficult. Never really got my way out of the hole there. And then, of course, lots of interesting things happened with film. And first of all, that was COVID. So we had COVID hit. Nobody was working for a while. I also film is seasonal, so I hadn't worked for a while. COVID hit. Fortunately, film was able to go back to work sooner than a lot of other people, so I got back to work and started earning more money, like enough to live. And then there were industry strikes in the film industry. So mostly those strikes were about AI, which interestingly enough, so the whole thing about basic income and like what we're doing with work was really very relevant at the time. Sorry, I'm just going to catch my breath for a minute. Psychosis survivor. Okay. Yeah, okay, so what happened was, I worked in film and television over the strikes. I was out of work for about 6 months or so. I started to spiral into another mental health crisis because I didn't have income, financial stress. I was also isolated due to COVID. And thank you for bearing with me during that minor brain fart just there. I ended up in hospital in 2023. I was hospitalized 3 times because it was so severe. And I remember reflecting on that even when I was in the hospital, that for the amount of money that had been spent to hospitalize me, we do have universal health care in Canada, but of course it still costs the government money. The government spent all that money to hospitalize me, but if I'd had a basic income 6 months earlier, it would have cost maybe a third to half, what it cost to hospitalize me for that time. And I should also note, I didn't want to go to the hospital. Hospitals are terrible places for people in psychosis, which maybe sounds counterintuitive if you haven't been through it, but they're not healing places. And so the fact that the government decided that I needed to go to the hospital was all their decision. And and if there was just some support for people that didn't have income, I had already exhausted other options like EI and things like that. So that's my kind of long story there. I did work a little bit, but it was too late. I'd had a job at the airport for about a month, and then I was fully into psychosis, and then all the way through 2023. And then I met my fiance, my now fiance, and now I'm back in school. I'm on ODSP, but I'm back in school. This is the weirdness of it. ODSP will give you quote-unquote living expenses, which are way below the poverty line, but I've been able to survive on that. OSAP will give you money for school, although Doug Ford is trying to kill that too. But that guy is like, I swear it's personal. Anyway, so I'm back in school now. I'm studying writing and things that I can work with my mental health. I will be able to pursue a career in this that will, a career in writing will support my disability basically. And but the problem is that I can't use OSAP for living and I can't use ODSP for tuition. So there's this weird trade-off where I have money but only for education. And then of course this summer, at the beginning of May, my partner faced unstable housing. Do you mind if I?
No, go ahead.
We're both on ODSP.
Yeah.
We're both disabled. She was facing housing instability, more time at my place. Now, my landlord had a problem with that kind of weirdly and all that stuff. So basically, we're like quasi-homeless at this point. As of this conference, we're literally going to a viewing to see an apartment tonight. And we have more to do tomorrow and all that. It's pretty crazy, and so we're facing all the financial barriers. If we had a basic income and if that were normalized in society, then we would face fewer barriers. We have more options as to safe places to live, and we would also not face the discrimination that we face. We've already had landlords, take one look at our funding sources, and because we're not employed. We're disabled on ODSP, and we have hostile landlords. It's like no, we don't want you in our place, even though we're very good tenants and lived quite successfully at our prior places of residence. So that's kind of my story so far, and I just want to highlight, like some of the issues that kind of tumble out of that. I think mostly people here at this conference are going to be familiar with most of this, but the fact that poverty makes everything worse, So if you don't have enough money, it's hard to get work if you don't have work because you don't have enough money to take care of yourself properly, or to maybe you're not eating all the time, you're not thinking properly. There's all these other things. Your mental health suffers, financial stress. That again, between isolation and financial stress, that's what sent me into my most recent psychosis. It wasn't, a dopamine imbalance, which is what the psychiatrists say. They're so out for lunch on that. It was literally my material conditions that put me in psychosis. And so a basic income would really, really help with something like that. And however that's implemented, and of course there's lots of discussions about how a basic income would actually be implemented, but some kind of unconditional support for people in financial straits would be, that isn't needs tested and all the stuff with EI and jumping through all the bureaucratic hoops in order to prove that you need it and that you're not a criminal. I mean, it's very silly. It really criminalizes people who have needs, for having needs. Just something else I'll say is that, well-supported people, on the other hand, the poverty makes everything worse, but well-supported people are an investment. Well-supported people are happier, they use emergency services and healthcare less, there's less crime, there's less difficulty in the community and all that. And I would say that, the way this kind of connects to a lot of systemic and social barriers, which I've kind of touched on, the idea of means and needs testing, it does criminalize people. The fact that there's clawbacks on ODSP and all the social assistance, so that if you earn money, then they immediately take money away, and then you can't dig out of that artificial hole that they put you in. It really becomes a trap. And when I was in the hospital, the first hospital in 2023, my parents really wanted me to get back on ODSP. I didn't want to do it because I wanted to be independent. I didn't want to get back in that trap again. I did end up doing it. It was better to do it ultimately, but some money is better than no money. But it really was very difficult. I think I've touched on the housing stigma. Things like paperwork. The fact that there's so many hoops to jump through when you're trying to get on social assistance makes it very difficult. Especially for somebody who's suffering a disability or is like in psychosis or something, paperwork is the last thing on your mind, right? So there's all those things, and then there's of course the systemic barriers, right? There's various forms of discrimination. There's even within ODSP, like dealing with an ODSP worker, a lot of the workers you can tell hate ODSP recipients. They're there to police them, it's very weird. They're not necessarily a lot of good people, but a lot of people that are there to sort of punish people for being in that situation, which is very ableist and everything else. And then there's of course other forms of discrimination, sexism, racism, homophobia, classism. Something that we're finding, and just kind of worth noting, and at the risk of making people uncomfortable, is like even at the conference here, like the differential between where people are at economically means that people who are more comfortable, like if they don't return an email, it's not a big deal, but for somebody in poverty, it's like, that can really change your life, like even just receiving it or just being heard, just being listened to and acknowledged, and that kind of thing. So we've had a whole summer of that from various organizations, and so I guess we're really sensitive to it right now. But I just wanted to close basically by touching on the poly crisis and how this all relates. Actually, let me back step for a minute. I'll talk about the basic income pilot. It alleviated all those things because it was more money. It was a better ceiling. It allowed me to get gainful employment out of a bad situation. It got me out of the ODSP trap. Even though it was canceled, it was very helpful. Even though there were still clawbacks, which is a bit of a problem, at least the ceiling was higher. So the clawbacks didn't kick in until I was working. So the basic income pilot did work for me. It really helped me a lot. So I wanted to touch on that. But then to touch on the poly crisis, like we have all these problems, like environmental, political, personal, like so much of the political situation right now is class rage. You have so many working class people, particularly on the sort of the right wing end of the spectrum, that have all this rage, and the leaders in that camp are really good at redirecting that rage toward the left and toward vulnerable people, to the disabled, to racialized people, to women, LGBTQ people, like all of it. And it's like they're redirecting it at that, and it's like if we had a basic income, then we would alleviate that. And maybe they know that, and maybe that's why they're so opposed to it, but they need to be able to mobilize people, and they want people desperate and angry and all that stuff. And so that's a huge thing. And so ultimately, I've kind of come to the conclusion, and I've written about it, not as much due to our current housing crisis, but I've written about it there. You can find me online if you want to, mostly on Substack at this point. But the idea that the polycrisis itself, the whole polycrisis, is fundamentally about the relationships that we have, right? So basic income is a key piece of changing society, but ultimately it's our whole way of relating to the world has to change, right? And the way we relate to the natural world, the way we relate to each other, and the way we engage in all of that. And, because honestly, at the root of all of it is something like misogyny, like misogyny and patriarchy, and the whole sense that that we don't have to relate to each other, or that we can just get away with putting each other down and dominating each other. Like that it's built into everything. And so I just wanted to close and say, that the indigenous people whose land we're standing on, like they had this saying, all our relations, and they knew that they were related to everything, every being in the universe, and we need to, and we should be centering indigenous people in this whole thing, like with basic income and everything else, and that we need to relate to all of that. And I think basic income can be a key part of transforming the world, but it really comes down to that. It comes down to our relationships and how we relate to each other, and whether or not we think people are worth helping. Like there's an empathy crisis going on. That's the poly crisis. So, thank you for listening to me. Does anybody have any questions?
So question, just a comment. I just want to say thank you for being brave enough to come out and speak as a participant as well. I understand, especially if this is one of your first times going out, how difficult it is, and how you stand out there wondering how much judgment you're going to get, of course not in this room, but in the world, as a participant, you got judgment. That's just fact. So thank you for coming and sharing your story today, because it does make a difference.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate that. Thank you. And like everybody, I can tell, like you guys are great. So thank you. So I will turn it over to Elaine.
I'd just like to echo what Jody said, and also like the fact that you're in a housing crisis and you're
Right.
here presenting.
It's kind of important, yeah.
Very relevant.
But not everybody could do that. I mean, anyway, thank you for being here and for like helping us put faces to the 4,000 people who.
Yeah, that's important.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.